I'm going to try to demonstrate some processes in the behavior of pigeons. And whether I do or not depends on the pigeons. If things go well, that will be fine. If they don't, I can take that long-standing line of all teachers that it's always the student who fails. But I don't mean to do that because the pigeon is always right. Whatever the pigeon does today, it will do because of the conditions we have arranged for it. Now, if things do not work out, it will be my fault for not arranging the proper conditions, but not quite my fault either, because if I were going to study these processes properly, I should get rid of a lot of distractions which are around me right now and isolate the pigeon, but you wouldn't see anything in that case, so it can't be done that way. We're going to use hungry pigeons, and we're going to give them food. For what purposes, I'll explain in a moment. And we give them food with a simple device. The pigeon will be in a space like this or on this table, and the food is presented with a little machine which lifts a tray of food within reach of the pigeon. Pigeon can get access to it through an opening in the space, and when the tray falls away, the pigeon can no longer eat. Well, let's have a pigeon or two. This is an unusual pigeon. You won't find many of them in the park, but it's the kind of the pigeon which has been around for a long time, living with men for several thousand years. And there have been, of course, billions of them on the surface of the earth. They've had to get along. They've had to get things from the environment essential to their existence. Now, the little apparatus operated, and as you see, the pigeon ate. It's already been trained to come over and get food when that particular piece of equipment operates. Now, I'm not going to let you see any more of that because we're going to come back to it later. There's another pigeon here. It's actually a dove, a related species, and we'll be back to that later. This apparatus is very much the same kind of thing, except it's out in the open. We wanted you to be able to see the bird clearly, and so there is no glass or screen. There's a problem there. Birds are free spirits and like to fly, but we hope the bird will stay in place for this experiment. It's been nicely trained to do so, and we'll see how well that works. This is the same food dispenser, and I can operate it by pressing this button. Now, what I want to demonstrate is a process called operant conditioning. It has been studied for many years under other names, but not as precisely as in the last few years. More than 75 years ago, Edward Thorndike, the American psychologist, began to study what he called the law of effect, that behavior was affected by its consequences, what happened after an organism behaved. This was a particularly important step because up to that point, the effect of the environment on an organism had not been clearly understood. The first evidence that the environment did something to the organism rather than just vice versa was the reflex. Something happens in the environment and the organism responds. And that gave rise to what is called stimulus-response psychology, which is not what I'm going to demonstrate here today. The consequences of behavior are as important as its antecedents. And things happen to an organism after it behaves and have a very important effect on it. And the effect is to make it more likely that the organism will behave in the same way again. And that is what is called operant conditioning. Food to a hungry organism, a hungry pigeon, is what we call a reinforcer. And all I can do with this switch is to make that reinforcer occur at the proper time. Now, I'm going to use this switch to operate the magazine, to reinforce the pigeon for doing something, and you will, I trust, see this effect on the pigeon. Now, if I were just to hand the pigeon some food, that would be a delayed sort of reinforcement, but instead the pigeon has been already conditioned to turn and go and eat when this light flashes and when the sound of the magazine is heard. Now, that flash of light and sound can be made almost simultaneous with the behavior that I want to produce. And we're going to try another pigeon now, and I will try to pick out some particular pattern of behavior and make it a more frequent part of the repertoire of the bird. Right, fine. This bird has been already conditioned to eat when the magazine sounds and the light flashes. Now we'll just watch its behavior a bit. It's not doing anything in particular, you see, but I'm going to try to get it to do something. Suppose I shape up the behavior of making a complete turn. What I do is simply, as I did then, to wait for some part of that behavior. There's more of it, you see. You can see that the effect is instantaneous. I'm waiting for it to turn counterclockwise now. And then I reinforce that movement. And I wait for a more pronounced movement than that. It's got to be more than that. There we go, all the way around. Now, if I'd waited for that to begin with, without doing the partial reinforcement, it might not have occurred for a long time. But that's the wrong way. That was my mistake. I've gone back to pick up the beginning movement because the bird wasn't going all the way around, and I was afraid I would lose it, which means I was afraid it would fly away. It's making the starting movement, you see, but not finishing it. There. And by reinforcing every time it turns that way. Now, just to convince you that I didn't start with that already somewhat built in, I'll reverse it. Now I'm now going to extinguish that turn to the... Now I'm going to pick up the turn the other way. I'm not going to allow the counterclockwise move to extinguish too much because I'm afraid of losing the pigeon. But the first movement in the other direction I pick up and reinforce. That's the old response and the wrong one. And I don't want to pick up this because this is the last part of the other response. I want... It's challenging me. I want a good, powerful movement to the right. The emotional, there's a bit of a one to the right. There's a better one. There's a better one. That was an accident, but a very good one, because I reinforced precisely as the head swung that way. Now, there we go. That's what I was looking for. Just that first turn to the right away from the food magazine. Since he takes the old response first, there. I'm picking up anything I can get in desperation. You have to pick up a bit at a time. If you simply wait, you might wait forever. That would be true of any kind of complex response. For example, if we were trying to get the pigeon to pace a figure 8 and to do both of these at once, you'd have to wait a long time unless you start this way. But if I had a few more minutes to go, I would be able, I think, to have him pacing a figure 8 with some skill. Not even a ballet dancer couldn't do very well on that screen surface with pigeon feet. Well, I think that's about enough on that. Now we have to capture the bird. That was my fault. I should have. Now, meanwhile, let me tell you what's been going on in the other apparatus. The pigeons that I put in have been getting food every 15 seconds, but that is determined by a clock and not by the bird's behavior. And you might say, well, nothing is being reinforced. The pigeon doesn't need to do anything. It can stand perfectly still and yet be fed. There's nothing he can do to speed things up. Now, that is not correct, because although there's nothing in the apparatus which requires the pigeon to do anything, the apparatus is going to reinforce whatever the pigeon is doing. And this pigeon right here has picked up what we must call a superstition. It's doing something which, if you could ask it, it would say, that's the way I make the food dispenser operate. Is actually, what it's doing is looking up very high along the wall and moving back and forth. Now, when I take this screen away, it will stop for a bit because it will disturb the pigeon. But if you wait, I'm pretty sure it will come back. This is it. It's holding the head up, moving back and forth. And that's the way the pigeon is making the dispenser operate. So he thinks. And you would think it if you were doing this. These are superstitions. And they are behaviors which have, by accident, come to be connected with reinforcement. If you go to the baseball game, you watch pitchers. Now, the pitcher is in a very tricky situation. He throws a ball. It may come smashing back at him 60 miles an hour, or it may go over the fence and lose him the game, or it may be caught and win the game for him, and so on. It's terribly important consequences based upon that behavior of throwing the ball. But if you watch a pitcher, they have all sorts of behaviors of this kind. They can't touch their mouth anymore. That's illegal. But they have a great deal of behavior which in the past has been followed by some of these terribly important consequences. Now, I think it's clear that this behavior has now become a standard pattern. The bird is looking for something, moving back and forth. Actually, when I've done this before, I've got a great variety of things. Hopping from one foot to another, spinning around, bowing, praying, all sorts of things of this kind. And it will change slowly. If we let this bird go this way day after day, getting all its food this way, the topography of that would change. It would become more pronounced, more clearly a product of incidental, accidental, adventitious reinforcement. The pigeon is, of course, a visual animal, and it's in the visual space. And when it turns one way, it not only makes a motion with some muscles, it is actually turning towards something which it can see. So that it's not just a motor response. It is a motor response with respect to an environment. But there is another point about the way in which the visual environment can control behavior, and you can demonstrate that by showing how the same response will or will not be made to a given stimulus. And I'm going to demonstrate that now with a different arrangement here. I can turn a light on or off behind this small circular disc, which is an electric key and operates the food dispenser. Now, I can arrange it in such a way that when the pigeon responds to light on or light off, it will or will not be reinforced. And what we want now is to show that a pigeon which has already learned to respond to both light on and light off can, by what we call differential reinforcement, be led to respond to only one and not the other. So if we may have a pigeon now. I don't think there's very much difference between the probability of a response to one or the other, but I will actually now reinforce only when the light is off and not when the light is on. So we'll get some extinction to the lighted key. And reinforcement to the response to the dark key. You saw immediately then that there's already a more positive response to the dark key. This is extinction. Now, as the bird turns away, I darken the key, and that dark key can now begin to operate as a reinforcer to get the bird to turn away from the magazine, actually. Now, as it turns away, I darken the key, and that is now being used as a reinforcer to get the pigeon to turn away. Now, by turning away, the pigeon can essentially, what I'm doing here, I reinforce it for turning away by darkening the key, and then, of course, the bird comes back and responds to the darkened key and is fed. And these are very hesitant pecks. Just get it away from the key. I'm using it exactly as I use the food to reinforce the See, there's already a difference in the, very considerable difference in the probability of the two. Well, I think that shows clearly enough that how rapidly you can get the bird to discriminate and to respond to one and not to the other. If you think that something's been going on inside the bird and that it has formed a discrimination or gone through some kind of rational process, you're wrong. All that has happened is that one stimulus now controls the response and the other one doesn't. If I could get the bird a little farther away from the key, and then bring him in and turn it. Once he starts the motion, as a matter of fact, when the bird strikes the key, its eyes are absolutely tightly closed. This is a protective reflex which comes about when pigeons are foraging and so on. Well, any questions?